America, a land full of people. But before these new people arrived, there was already other people living here. These people who were native to America, we often refer to as Native American. What does it mean to be Native American? What does their culture and society look like? What happened that caused them to change so drastically? The answer may depress you. My name is Mr. Thompson, this is Cedric the Skull, and you're watching Low Budget History. It's low budget. What is a budget? It's low budget history with Cedric the Skull. A few days ago, I asked my students to answer the question, what do you think of when you hear the term Native American? The top answers were, they're a small tribal people, largely nomadic, at one with nature, and they wear feather hats. While this does not reflect everyone's response, it does show a significant lack of nuance when it comes to the idea of talking about Native Americans and their culture. So, let's take a brief, shallow deep dive into what it can mean to be a Native American, starting with the map. The first thing you should notice about a map of the Americas is that they are very big. In fact, so big, they are at least one Cedric in size each. Why does this matter? Well, over a wide range of geography, we can expect human societies to develop very differently. Take the Andes mountain range here down in southern Peru. If you're living on a very high and very narrow mountain range stuck between a massive desert and the ocean, you're probably going to have a different society compared to the Wampanoag in Northeast America. Two very different climates, two very different circumstances of how they're going to develop. Just because they're both native to America doesn't necessarily mean they're going to have that many similarities. In fact, you could probably find more differences between the different tribes in North America versus the empires in Mesoamerica, republics, federations, tribal groups, than they have similarities. So when students replied that their image of a Native American was largely nomadic peoples, they're probably more thinking of tribes such as the Comanche, the Navajo, Hopi, in the American Southwest. And this is kind of the Western Indian you'll see in old-fashioned movies. But this is not an accurate representation of Native Americans across all of America. So, to get a better understanding of just the huge amount of differences we can see in these different kinds of people, let's go to the smartboard to better get a comparison of these different societies. What you're looking at here is an approximation map of the different cultures and societies found in America before the arrival of outsiders. Now, the first thing you might notice is it's a complete mess. And that's because there were so many different tribes and societies that it's kind of hard to keep track of who lived where and who owned what. Partially because some of these societies were nomadic and they didn't really own any land. They would travel throughout hunting grounds at different times of years. Other times they were massive empires that lived and stayed in one place, subsisting off farming and animal herding. Let's take a look at a few of these cultures and just see how different they can be from one another. Or we can look at the Incas, who lived in Peru along the Andes mountain range, building massive cities such as Machu Picchu here on top of these sky-high mountains, using nothing but manual labor and llamas. Compare them to the Mississippi mound builders, who built their entire civilization along the banks of the Mississippi, building giant temples on top of these mound-like structures. Two very different peoples as a result of two very different geographies. But what happened to these people? I think we have visitors. Oh, would you look at this? It's history's three most common culprits when it comes to the loss of human civilization. Mr. Assimilation, Mr. Disease, and of course, Mr. Genocide. Now, not to make light of a very serious issue, All these things are terrible, and what happened to Native Americans should be largely considered a tragedy. But to what extent these three culprits played a role in their disappearance is still a widely debated topic amongst historians. Were the Americas populated by millions of people who are all wiped out by a combination of European diseases and the European need to indoctrinate people into their way of life and European violence against Native Americans? Or were they greatly exaggerated as part of a mission to rewrite history and make Europeans look more like the bad guys? But how do we know when Europeans are the ones who wrote the history in the first place? Because a lot of Native American, both oral and written tradition, was lost with much of their society. Now, if the goal was to eliminate Native American and their culture and traditions, they failed. Native Americans are still around to this day. Some of you might have even Native American heritage you don't even know about. Some of you might be really proud of where you come from and the heritage that has survived hundreds of years in many attempts to destroy it. Be proud of where you come from. And never forget the history of any peoples that come from this earth. We're all human. Human history is something we should all treasure and protect. So I hope we learned something about how much culture and diversity the Americas truly had, that Native Americans are not just one people. They are many of indescribable variety across a very vast region. So when someone asks you, what do you think of when you think Native American? I want you to think, now that's a question that is going to take a long time to answer. To help supplement your learning and so that you can get an insight into some of the specifics of these different cultures, I'll be trying to link videos below of civilizations such as the Mayas, the Aztec, Inca, and the Shoshone people of Northeast America. Of course, there are thousands more and tons of resources out there to help your learning. If you find any you particularly like, send them to me and I can link them to the rest of the class as well. If you're watching this for fun, why? But thank you for watching. My name is Mr. Thompson, this is Cedric the Skull, and this has been Low Budget History. It's low budget. What is a budget? It's low budget history with Cedric the Skull.